The power of hope is greatly misunderstood. When all seems lost, hope is what keeps us sane and productive, so we can survive and thrive no matter what life has to offer. And yet, false hope is toxic. So how can you tell the difference? There's never a reason to lose hope. In fact, using hope strengthens and improves our connection to God. How can we cultivate this incredible spiritual power? All this and more in today's episode of Into the Storm. Welcome back to Into the Storm. I'm your host, Justin Deschamps. Now, in this episode, we're going to take a pause from everything that we've been covering, although we're going to build on what we've been covering, to talk about hope, because we're in a situation where I think this information I'm about to share with you is going to become very useful and helpful for you. And what I've realized in my work is that it's often the absence of hope and the inability to know how to use and cultivate hope that can cause a lot of people despair. And despair is really daunting. It makes us feel depressed. It makes us irritable and filled with negative emotions. It makes us kind of insane and crazy. And it can cause a lot of problems for ourselves and our personal relationships with others, especially if you're somebody who has other people relying on you, like you're a parent or you're a manager, or you have friends and relatives that rely on you to be a stable person. What often defines a good leader is somebody who can manage the chaotic situations in a way that they don't lose hope. They can formulate plans that are effective in dealing with uncertain situations so that everyone can survive and even thrive in a seemingly chaotic and uncertain situation. So we're going to have a very special episode of Into the Storm where I'm going to share with you, as much as I can within a short period of time, what hope is, how to cultivate hope, and why it's actually always good to be hopeful. Everybody needs to hope for something. And our ability to use hope properly makes all the difference in the world. The reason why is that life is uncertain. We don't necessarily know what tomorrow brings. And so if we don't use the technique of hope to manage our emotions and keep our mind open and productive, then it's very easy for the tragedies of life to destroy our dreams and even make us feel kind of endless fear for potentially horrible things. I would suggest for your consideration that what we've been through over the past year with respect to the coronavirus pandemic and the resulting lockdown has reinstilled in us the need to understand and use and really master this technique of hope. If last year was any indication, then this year is going to continue to provide us with opportunities to really exercise this muscle for hope. As a matter of fact, there's several people out there that are suggesting that what is about to happen with humanity and the world is going to kind of push us to our limits. Now, I'm not trying to scare you, but what I am saying is that our ability to develop what might be called spiritual resilience, of which hope is a big part of that, will allow us to take advantage of these new opportunities and these new situations in a way that actually makes us stronger, happier, and better people in general. And then we can share that cheerful state with others to help inspire them. So what is hope? Hope is this expectation for the future, that there's going to be something positive more often than not. When we say the word hope, we're often saying you're hoping for something positive. You're not necessarily hoping for anything negative. So it's tied to expectation. And that means it's about envisioning the future and dealing with the future in some way. And because the future is uncertain, it helps you deal with uncertainty. For example, if you think that you're going to have your job tomorrow morning, you don't need hope necessarily to deal with the possibility that you won't have your job. But if you think that you're going to lose your job, then there's an uncertainty there. There's a situation that is in a state of flux. And that's when hope can be very helpful. You might think to yourself, well, even though I think I might lose my job because the company is going under, it's possible that I might be able to start a new business. I'm a qualified person, I have education, I have skills, and therefore I can find a new job if I do lose my method of employment. When you're dealing with an uncertain situation, you often go within, use the powers of mind, you explore possibilities, and you account for and deal with those possibilities. This allows you to feel good in the moment to a certain extent, so that way you're not plagued with negative emotions. Hope at a kind of practical, personal level is a tool that we use to comfort ourselves. But it's also something more than that. In order to cultivate hope, you need to have a certain set of skills in hand. You need to be able to imagine and think about the future. So what is uncertain? Can you properly register and understand what is uncertain? You need to be able to deal with the possibilities of what the future holds. And you need to be able to exercise letting go, or have what's called outcome independence, in order to deal with situations so that when what you hope for or what you want to happen doesn't happen, it doesn't cause you to completely shatter and fall apart. So hope can be really useful. In order to really take advantage of hope, we need to allow ourselves to explore possibilities. This means you need to use your imagination. It also means you have to dedicate time and energy to exploring possibilities. It requires a willingness to even want to explore and use your imagination to deal with less than ideal situations. I mean, you wouldn't need to use hope if you thought everything was going to work out perfectly, if you trusted in the future so much that you never worried that you wouldn't have your needs and values met. But when life deals you uncertain situations and puts your life at risk, when I say life, I mean the things that you value in life and you need in life, then the muscle or the technique of hope can be very useful. So let's understand how emotions work. We covered this a little bit before. I'm going to review it very briefly here. At a fundamental level, the way you generate positive emotion is moving from one state of emotion to a higher one. That's often done through anticipation. Let's say you don't have any food and it's been like a week. You're going to be really hungry. Now let's say you discover that you're going to have access to food later. Let's say you haven't had food for whatever reason, and you realize that you can go to some place where you can get food, and it'll take a little time to get there. Maybe you have to walk like 2 miles to get there, but when you get there, you're going to have the food that you want. As soon as you make this realization that you can have the food you want, you're going to go from this place of not being too happy because you don't know how you're going to have access to food, to now seeing a pathway to have one of your needs met. And that anticipation is going to cause you to be filled with positive emotion, excitement of getting the thing that you want. Then you're going to go to that place that has food, and the whole time you're there, you're going to be filled with anticipation, positive emotions. Your brain is going to be filled with dopamine and serotonin and various other neurotransmitters that are going to fill you with positive emotion and really motivate you at an energetic level. You're actually going to get more energy And that will help you deal with pain, or it'll help you deal with the cold. It'll help you deal with all sorts of things. So the ability to generate positive emotion is actually literally, it's like a survival trait. It's going to help you deal with all sorts of different situations. Then when you get to that place that has the food, you're going to eat the food. And in that moment you eat the food, you're going to feel incredible elation. You'll get a spike of positive emotion. And then that positive emotion will pretty quickly drop as you get satiated and you start to get full. And at the end of the meal, you'll feel good. You'll feel probably really good if you've been starving for a week, but you won't feel as good as the moment you first ate that food. The moment you first ate that food, it's going to be like almost orgasmic. And the reason all that happens is because, like we discussed in the series, the biological virtual reality environment, or your body itself, literally transmits to your soul through the body in the pineal gland of the brain various representations of the world. And so essentially your experience that you build your world out of is made of ideas. It's very similar to the Matrix. In the Matrix movies, the characters in the movie are interlinking with this, device that's in the back of their head that's feeding code and information into the brain that creates a representation of this world inside their own head. Very similar to like when you're dreaming. And all of that, we could say pretty simply, is made of ideas. So what the reason why that's important is because, for all intents and purposes, the thing that fuels your body with respect to whether it should feel good about something or not is ideas. It's information, information, as we've said before in the series. That means the better you are able to manage your own thoughts and generate certain perspectives and ideas, the better able you are to generate positive emotion. So what happens when you have a chaotic situation happen is something that you knew and trusted could be put at risk. If we go through some situation where, I don't know, martial law gets declared, or there's civil unrest, like what happened last year with all these protests and riots, you might not be able to access food. You might not be able to see your friends and loved ones. You might not be able to do the things that excite you and make you feel rewarded and inspired. And so those are things that you use to feel good about yourself and feel good about life and feel alive and happy. And if your access to those things is put at risk, then you could feel a sense of despair. So what's really important is, in order to take advantage of hope, you need to learn how to deal with those possibilities. Now, psychologically, it has been shown that if you don't learn how to deal with those possibilities, if you lose access to your job and you don't know how to contend with that uncertainty, it means that you lack resilience. And that lack of resilience is going to cause you to feel a tremendous amount of anxiety and negative emotion. When you know and you trust something will be there and that thing isn't there, well, that plan or that object or that thing that you thought was going to be there might not be there anymore. And now you have to deal with this uncertainty. When that breakdown happens, you need to go back inside and in here to deal with the situation and formulate a new plan. In order to formulate a plan, you have to believe that formulating a plan is actually possible. And that's where the hope part comes in. You have to hope and believe in yourself that no matter what happens at some level, that you can deal with the situation, that you're smart enough, that you have access to the resources you need, even though it might not look like it right now. And ultimately, I would say that there's a purpose and a reason why this is actually going to be beneficial for you. Now, this last one is one that we don't necessarily talk about that much in the secular world, but in the spiritual world, in the religious world, this is something that is not a new idea at all. So we need imagination. You need the willingness to think about these uncertainties. You need to be able to use letting go and outcome independence. So what does that mean? The thing that you identify with respect to having an ideal life is going to the movies. then now you can't go to the movies. Boy, you're going to be in a really nasty place, aren't you? So first you have to let go of the fact that you can't go to the movies. If you continually think every day you're going to maybe be able to go to the movies, you're going to drive yourself nuts, right? Especially if we're in a lockdown situation like we've been over the past year and change. You need to be able to let go of that thing you're expecting. And remember, when you have an expectation that can't be met, that expectation is itself a desire, and that desire is a specific thing. So it creates obstacle consciousness. That expectation is now in the way of getting what you really need and value at a deeper level. And so you need to let it go, or you need to move it out of the way so that you can create a new path to getting what you need and value. All of that requires imagination, that you have to use your mind to think about things in here. So when I say imagination, that's what I mean, is that you're going within, you're manipulating the thought and information world of your being. And with that ability to manipulate that part of you, you can let things go. You can think of new ways to get what you want and you value and you dream about. And you can see how the situation you've got in hand, even though it might not be what you expected, could actually be a kind of like Easter egg or something that's a hidden treasure that you didn't know was there. Have you ever had an experience where what you didn't expect to happen actually created something you valued and you wanted and that rewarded you? Have you ever had an experience that surprised you in a positive way? If the answer is yes, you have the ability to claim the general idea that, even though what I expected didn't happen, it actually is something I really wanted, even though I couldn't see it at the moment. Ask yourself this: is there a way to assume that something that you really want and value is on the other side of this uncertain event, even if you can't see it now? Well, that's the concept of faith that we're talking about. That no matter what is happening right now, that it seems so uncertain and seems maybe even dark and negative, might itself be part of a process that is going to get you what you want. And maybe that what's coming is so amazingly good and positive that you don't even have the ability to see it and know it right now. Let's imagine that in the next few weeks and months, something is going to happen that's going to so radically and positively change our world that sickness and disease is eventually going to go away. That any ailment you have potentially might be cured and dealt with forever. That all the financial problems that you're dealing with and the world is dealing with will be solved. The strife and pain and hardship that the world is suffering and has suffered for so long in our world, especially in recent years, is going to disappear. That something truly amazing is going to happen that is going to change everything for the good. Now, can you envision that? Do you know what that feels like? Is it possible for you to imagine, just like a child would imagine, that maybe that's possible? Well, if you can, then what we're talking about is this idea of having hope and having faith, even though you don't know what that looks like yet. And that's a really important part of hope. It's this transcendent concept of hope, that transcendent meaning it's going to transform. It's going to take you from a state that you are now and bring you to a higher, better, more amazing state, even though you don't get where you're at right now. Transcendence is essentially a God concept. It's a concept that has a spiritual foundation to it with respect to philosophy. Is it possible that something might happen that you can't expect, you can't define, you don't even understand, but it will be good and positive in the future? Well, there are a lot of times in our lives where surprises happen that we didn't really have the ability to appreciate in the moment, but eventually it taught us something. It gave us access to something we didn't know was there, and it really changed us in a way that was positive in the end. And so that's what we mean by the concept of transcendence, that who you are now is going to change into something better if you go through this experience. That's what that concept of transcendent hope is. This idea of transcendence is really powerful with respect to spiritual wisdom and spiritual qualities. In other words, that the spiritual superpower of hope in a good outcome, despite not knowing what's happening in the present, allows you to feel safe and assured, even if the whole world around you is falling apart. What we're talking about is what a lot of religions have talked about. Oh, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for the Lord is with me. Well, if you think about that prayer or that statement, is a statement of hope. It's a statement that no matter how dark things might seem, there is going to be a positive end, that events have been procured, that the system that governs our reality, it has a purpose to it. And if you just believe that that purpose is good and positive, it will ask you to change who you are now, but it'll be good in the end for you. So to transcend, you need to be able to let go. You need to be able to take this thing, this idea of what you wanted to happen, and set it aside long enough to allow your mind to be open to receiving what is currently in front of you so that you can deal with it. So at a practical, just like boots on the ground level, if you're driving down the road and your car breaks down, it's not an ideal situation. Of course, nobody wants their car to break down. But if you're having a hard time accepting reality, is that going to help you? If you're just like, oh no, my car's fine, and you're just like carrying on as if your car is fine, are you going to be able to get to where you need to go? More specifically, are you going to be able to deal with the problem that has just been put in your way? Are you going to be able to deal with the obstacle? So remember, when we discuss tools and obstacles, our consciousness is at a very deep level is designed to basically determine, is this thing that I'm dealing with now, is this a tool or is this an obstacle? When things get in the way of our plans and our expectations, those are obstacles. The way to deal with an obstacle is to accept that the obstacle is there. So that's the first step. Believe you have the ability to deal with the obstacle. And third, start to actually go through the process of formulating a real and practical plan to deal with whatever's just been thrust in your lap. So if you're driving your car and it's broken down, the sooner you accept that fact, the sooner you can implement a plan to deal with it. Maybe you're going to call somebody. Maybe you're going to get on the side of the road, drive the car. Hopefully it's a situation where you can pull it over and it won't cause too many issues, and you can try to flag somebody down. And once you've done that, you'll be able to deal with the situation in a way that hopefully gets addressed quickly. Now, everybody knows that there's some situations that are so seemingly crazy that it requires a lot of letting go of what you expected so you can just completely immerse yourself in this new moment. So from the spectrum of uncertain situations, we have very minor and light. Like you went to go to work one day and you got to your car and realized that the battery was dead. Well, that's a pretty minor obstacle. You have to figure out how to charge the battery. Maybe you need to jump. Maybe you need to call a mechanic. Maybe you need to call AAA. Maybe you need to call for a ride or an Uber so you can get to work and deal with the problem later. So it's a disruption. It's frustrating, but it's on the minor scale. A more serious obstacle is a major life-threatening situation, like you're on a cruise and the ship sinks and now you have to survive on the ocean for some crazy long period of time, like a life of pi situation. It's probably the most extreme you can imagine, something like that. So in either case, though, the same engine is in place. You have to accept what the situation is. You have to let go of what you thought you were doing so you can focus your time and attention on what is happening, so you can identify the obstacle and look for any tools that can help you deal with these new obstacles that have been thrown in your path. And then you can protect your values and your needs. So your values and your needs are at the kind of deep core of who you are. Like we've discussed before, you have these survival needs, You need food, you need water, you need shelter, you need social attachments. Spiritually, you have dreams and you have aspirations, you have inspiration. We'll get a little bit more into the importance of having a good spiritual goal set and why pursuing soul growth or the Creator or having a relationship with God can actually help you tremendously in uncertain situations. But for now, what I want you to realize is that when we're in an uncertain situation, we're dealing with things that have thrown obstacles in our path. So we have to deal with those steps I just mentioned. You have to accept the reality. You have to let go of the expectations. You have to face the obstacles that have been thrust in your path so you can identify tools, and then you can come up with a plan to manifest your needs and values in that moment. So as a matter of fact, what's really interesting and cool about these kind of uncertain situations when they happen is that it highlights these core principles we've actually been talking about throughout the series, which is that at the core of who you are, every life is a kind of game of how you're going to manifest your needs and values, and how good are you at using the objects in your surroundings, whether they're physical objects or mental objects, to manifest your needs and values. And then in order to do that, you need to create a game plan so that, okay, I'm going to, let's say that you're in a survival situation. Well, what tools do I have? Maybe I'm in my car. Do I have access to communications devices? Do I have warm clothes? Do I have a way to make clean water and find food? And then how are you going to use those tools across time to survive so that somebody can come and rescue you, or you can, leave whatever situation you're in? So why is it that we need hope at all? Well, we need hope because, as I said, we have these needs and values. I don't care who you are, what the situation is, you have to survive, and you got to do it in a way that it can inspire you, can make you feel happy. Well, there's more to it with respect to spiritual goals, but basically that's it. You don't want to just be in a situation where you're surviving, but you're not happy. You want to be in a situation where you're surviving and you're happy. So this happiness component, this inspiration component, the spiritual component is something that's really important. So no matter where you are in any situation, you always have to contend with those things. So this is the importance of having an understanding of the spiritual nature of reality, because ultimately, at the end of the day, the name of the game is self-mastery. The name of the game is mastery, period. That's what the idea of a sovereign really is a savior, one who can do what needs to be done, regardless of what's happening, to protect the needs and values of themselves and potentially other people. So in order to do that, you got to be kind of an expert at the game, right? People like to make fun of preppers, but they have some of it right. I'm not saying that you have to spend all your time and energy preparing for like crazy situations that might never manifest. There's basic things that you can do so that if the hits the fan, then you'll have a backup plan. Psychologically, it's when we don't have a plan to deal with uncertain situations that we deal with a tremendous amount of anxiety. What's very interesting is that even if you think that you'll be fine and safe, let's say that, you've never really had to deal with a survival situation, you've always had the money you need, your friends are always there, et cetera, et cetera. So you never really had to contend with uncertainty in a way that would force you to look at the possibilities of not having these things and therefore formulate plans to deal with them. A part of your body knows. If you ever watched a movie or heard a story about a survival situation and it's like bringing you to this incredible, palpable sense of suspense, and you're like, oh my God, I don't know what I'd do if I was in that situation. Well, guess what? It's because you don't have a plan to deal with potential crazy situations. Your body and your emotions, they're capable of assessing all possibilities. Even though you might not dwell on the idea of getting into an accident and potentially being lost in the wilderness for a few days, the idea itself still exists. And a part of you knows it. And a part of you also knows that you haven't figured out a way to deal with it. So what hope can do, and the technique of using imagination, critical thinking, and object independence can do, is it can give you a set of tools to deal with potentialities. And the more potentials you deal with, the stronger and more spiritually resilient you'll become. It's very similar to martial arts training. If I was in a situation where somebody was trying to mug me and I didn't know how to defend myself, then that would cause me a lot of anxiety. The thought of being mugged would cause me a lot of anxiety. And this is what's interesting, is the thought of potentially having that happen will cost you now if you don't have a plan to deal with it then. Think about that for a moment. So what does that mean? It means that if you spend your time wisely, and time is a kind of spiritual currency, whatever you spend your time doing, you're going to build up and create and get better at. If you spend your time learning to deal with various situations that you might be scared about, that you might be fearful of, that might put you at risk, your needs and your values at risk, then you'll feel stronger, better, and kind of like a superhero that feels like you can almost deal with anything. So preparing for potential fallouts, preparing for uncertain situations where things that you rely on now might not be there later, actually builds up spiritual resilience. It makes you a stronger person. It keeps you in a happier state of mind. Psychologically, we tend to feel the best emotionally and have the greatest access to our imagination and thinking, and we think the best and we feel physically healthiest when we're in a state of play. Physiologically, the system that manages alertness or calmness is the sympathetic nervous system, which deals with alert situations. So is there something wrong? Are you going to feel anxious because you're attacked, because you don't have access to food? You're in a threatened state. When you're in a threatened state, when you're physically threatened, the sympathetic nervous system is active. When you're in a calm state, when you don't have to worry about threats, then the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in. And so what's interesting is that the idea of potentially having to deal with a threatening situation is enough to cause the sympathetic nervous system to activate. That's why when you're watching a horror movie or hearing about a story of a friend that had to deal with some crazy situation that you don't know how to deal with, you're going to be in an anxious state. You're going to experience it as if it was literally happening right here and now. So the solution is to figure out a way to deal with it. Preppers, as I was saying earlier, one of the things they tend to do to deal with these situations is they're like, well, listen, I don't want to be caught in a situation where the power goes out and I don't have access to electricity, where there's civil unrest or something of that sort, where I can't get the food that I normally rely on, where I lose access to heat and shelter. So they create various game plans to deal with these uncertain situations with respect to their survival needs. And that can be very effective. So one of the things I strongly suggest everybody do just in general is to make a list of what are the things that worry you. And this is where that being willing to explore in your imagination really comes in handy. Is if you're willing to face potential uncertain situations, then you can identify what those are. You've crystallized them in terms of, the fact that they exist, and now you can find a tool to deal with that potential obstacle in the future. And the more you do that, this is the really cool thing. The more you face these potentially uncertain and chaotic situations, the more spiritual resilience you create for yourself. And this raises your positive emotion state. It makes it more likely for you to feel parasympathetic responses or positive emotion all the time, not just when you're dealing with a chaotic situation. And then the idea or the concept of a chaotic situation doesn't have all of a sudden cause like a massive breakdown to where you're like in a puddle in the floor, like not able to move. So there's 3 different ways to deal with uncertain situations as far as fear. There's fight, there's flight, and there's freeze. Freeze is the worst. We've talked about this before in Into the Storm. When you're in a freeze situation, you're paralyzed with fear. You can't think. Your heart is beating like 200 beats per minute. Cortisol and adrenaline levels have skyrocketed, and you're just not feeling good at all in any capacity. And you can't do anything. You're frozen. Like, you can't move, you can't fight, you can't do anything to try to survive or protect yourself. The reason why freeze happens is because people get into situations that they don't have a plan for. They've never thought about them. They've never allowed themselves to think about them. and they're just completely devoid of tools. It's a state of chronic unpreparedness. It creates in the mind an obstacle that's so big that you can't do anything. I'm going to use an analogy. Let's imagine you're walking down a path and you are so nescient or unaware of the world that you don't even think that the possibility of a boulder being in the path even exists. Well, what happens? A boulder is going to come in your path there and you're going to be like, God, I don't know what to do. And you're just going to sit there and not move forward. And your life will be completely put on hold to the extent where everything you value and you need to survive will be beyond your reach because there's this obstacle in the way. But if you see the situation for what it is and you imagine another way to deal with it, then you can just easily go around the boulder and boom, you're back on the path and there's no problem. One of the things that can happen in a chronic state of unpreparedness, because people don't use their imagination, because people are always distracting themselves with all sorts of things, is they just avoid potentially negative situations. And when you avoid a potentially negative situation for a really long time, when it lands in your lap, you don't know what the hell to do, and you're just completely paralyzed with fear. You panic and you just completely crumble. Now, flight is a little bit better. At least you can run away from the problem. That's at least something. And it channels that energy of sympathetic, negative emotion, negative anxiety in a way that at least you're going somewhere. And maybe you can run away from the problem. So there's times where flight is the best choice. Like, there is an animal coming or there's an attacker coming. And if you don't know how to defend yourself through martial arts, or you don't know how to deal with that animal, then maybe running is the best way. Some situations where that isn't the best, like apparently if you've got a bear that's coming after you, don't want to run, because in a lot of animals, the running itself triggers their predatory instincts and then they start chasing you. I think the way to deal with a bear is to like scream and be really loud and, ferocious and like scare it into not wanting to attack you anymore. But, you'll have to look that one up on your own. I'm not giving any advice about how to deal with bears here. The best is fight, bravery. It activates the xiphoid nucleus, like we talked about before. It allows you to be cheerful that, you know what, I can handle this situation and I'm going to deal with it. Now, the best way to deal with an uncertain situation is not in the moment that it's happening. It's before you get there. This is the idea of being prepared, exercising some state of preparedness. In our modern world, this idea of preparing for crazy and chaotic situations, it's almost like this thing that most people think is crazy. Like if you're a prepper, and to be sure, some people are really crazy with it, but basic levels of preparedness is not crazy. It's prudent. It's a good thing to do. In the past, 300-400 years ago, or even before the industrial age, 100 years ago, if you didn't know how to walk down a road and know how to defend yourself or know how to deal with, potentially a survival situation, you'd be crazy. Most people probably knew how to light a fire, how to find food, how to find water, how to defend themselves from basic predators. And if they didn't, well, they weren't going to be around too long. So basic levels of preparedness are important. In order to prepare for something, you have to take your imagination when you're safe and warm and cozy in your house and think about it now, so that in the future you have something to deal with. So when you're in an uncertain situation, one of the things that really helps to be hopeful for is that you've acknowledged the possibility that something negative might happen. So you face your fears and you've used your mind and logic and reason and knowledge to research how to deal with that situation and to develop a practical plan to deal with it if it happens. And what that will do is it will assuredly help deal with the anxiety. It'll help you deal with the anxiety in the moment because you're facing an uncertain situation, you've got a plan. And then if that thing happens, instead of freezing or just running away from the problem, you'll actually be able to face it. Now, psychologically, this is something that's really interesting that happens. We have the ability to create boogeymen. And what I mean by boogeyman, or what I've also called a phantom problem, is it takes this thing that is itself somewhat of a challenge and it turns it into this massive issue. It turns a molehill into a mountain. And it makes it so that you don't know how to deal with the situation. So if you are prepared before you get to the battlefield, if you've taken the time when you're warm and cozy and you're safe and you have access to that playful part of your imagination to think about how you're going to deal with situations, then you can prepare for them now. And that way, when you get to the battlefield, when you get into an uncertain situation, you can actually deal with it in a positive, happy, productive way. So that means hope is not just this hazy thing that like, oh, well, I've never thought about the possibility that there could be a lockdown, there could be civil unrest, there could be blackouts, and therefore, but I'm going to be hopeful anyway because, God's going to save me, or extraterrestrials are going to beam me out, or I'm just going to manifest these like superhuman powers. That's more irrational hope. I'm talking about substantive, rational hope. When I say substantive, I mean is that it's got substance to it. It's real, it's practical. The difference between irrational, foolish hope and rational, logical, substantive hope is the difference between a guy who drives through the outback with no supplies and no way to deal with a potentially crazy situation if his car breaks down, but he just believes it'll all work out without actually knowing why. And the guy who's got a survival kit in his car and ways and a satellite phone and different ways to deal with a potentially hazardous situation if his car breaks down in the middle of the Australian outback. So there's reckless hope and there's cautionary, practical, realistic hope. Having that practical plan allows you to deal with chaotic situations. And it makes it so that mountain, that obstacle that's in your path, is now not this huge beast that you can't do anything with and you just cower away from like, oh my God, what am I going to do? No, it's something that you can deal with. It might be a Goliath, but you're a David and you've got a rock and you've got a sling and you can throw those things at it and take this guy out, no problem. It builds bravery. So bravery isn't the absence of fear. Courage isn't this thing that makes fear disappear. Courage is the ability to, despite an uncertain and crazy and chaotic situation, muster your knowledge, muster your belief and faith in yourself, and your motivation to do something about it. And psychologically and history and probably a lot of your life experiences have shown you that when stuff gets crazy, if you believe that you can do it, so you have that transcendent hope, combined with real knowledge and practical plans, then that is what creates that kind of superhero consciousness. That's what allows you to deal with the boogeyman and face that dragon, face that villain, face that crazy situation, so that you become the hero instead of the victim. You become the Superman instead of the damsel in distress, the Lois Lane, to put it in a story term. Now, have you ever heard of the term black pill? A black pill is a piece of information that you believe that actually causes despair. It causes you to lose hope. A white pill is the reverse. It's a piece of information that causes you to feel uplifted and inspired. If you are somebody who tends to just swallow down the black pills, I'm sure you know somebody like this in your life, that no matter what happens, they're always seeing a pessimistic, negative, they have a very cynical attitude, and they're always seem to be wanting to dash their hopes and not believe in the possibility of a positive outcome. One of the reasons that happens is because life has often been hard on people, or in order to safeguard their own emotions, they just don't allow themselves to believe in anything good, because then there's no fall down when things go bad. remember, your ability to feel emotions is directly dependent on the difference between two states. If you're feeling normal and something bad happens, like you break your leg, then obviously you're going to go from one state of normalcy to a negative state, and that decline down is going to feel nasty. But if you're in a situation where you're normal and, you know, you've realized you're stronger than you are, like you can dance better than you thought, well, then you go from a normal state to a positive state. So what tends to happen with people when they want to constantly swallow black pills, when they don't allow themselves to believe in a hopeless situation, it's because they don't want to be let down. And to protect themselves, protect their inner child from the potential fallout of dealing with a negative situation, they don't believe or allow themselves to believe in any possibility of a hopeless situation. Because, hey, if you can assume the worst and only allow the worst to fill your mind, then when the worst happens, you'll be at least you'll be at a level of normalcy. But here's the problem. If you're constantly filling yourself with black pills, if you never allow yourself to feel hopeful, then you're not really living either. You're just waiting to die. And that's what happens in our world. A lot of people are in bad situations. They don't know how to deal with them. They don't know how to spend their time to practically formulate plans so that they can feel like they have access to tools to deal with the obstacles in their lives. And so as a defensive measure, which is actually usually an indication of some type of post-traumatic stress disorder or depression or something like that, they will just never entertain the possibility of a hopeful situation. This can sometimes happen in survival situations, like, you know, somebody's been kidnapped or they're lost at sea. And maybe at first they thought there was that ship on the horizon and like, oh my God, the ship's on the horizon, yes. And they just get filled with so much hope, and then that anticipation that I was talking about before really starts to buzz and percolate in them. And they're like, oh my God, we could get rescued. But then they don't get rescued. Have you ever seen the movie The Life of Pi? This happens at one point in the movie. This boy, he's trying to go across the Pacific Ocean, I believe, with his family from India to the United States. The ship goes down, he loses everybody, and at one point he's on this raft. He's been on the raft for a really long time, and he's trying to signal this ship that's, you know, moving by, and he's shooting these flares, and none of the flares actually signal the ship, and his hopes are dashed. If he swallows a black pill, then he'll feed his mind only the musings and thoughts of negative outcomes as a way to try to protect himself from being disappointed again. And then what happens? Then you're in despair. You don't bother trying to do anything to improve your situation. And so black pills can be really dangerous. Often the reason why people have black pill situations is because they lack imagination. They don't have a lot of experience dealing with chaotic situations, so they're kind of nescient or not ignorant necessarily, because ignorant means that you were given an opportunity to learn something and you just refused it. Nescience is more you just don't know. You just never have encountered the information. So if you're in a situation where the power goes out and you don't know how to deal with that situation, you're nescient. Now, if you had the opportunity to learn in a survival class how to deal with the power being out, and you just decided to play on your phone the whole time, then now you're ignorant. You've ignored wisdom and knowledge that would otherwise have helped you if you just spent the time learning. And they often have a hard time believing in a transcendent outcome, that despite no matter what's happening, they can actually have something good happen, even though you don't really know how that's even possible. A white pill is the reverse. A white pill is a piece of information that allows you to feel positive, hopeful about the future. And what that does is it activates positive emotion. Now, when you're in a positive emotion state, when you're in a happy, uplifted, playful state, you literally have more access to your brain and your frontal cortex and your neocortex to think, to envision, to critically assess a situation, to come up with creative solutions to deal with problems. If you don't have that, then you're in a stressed out, fearful state. You're in a frozen state instead of a fight state. And that prevents you from even thinking there are tools available to use. So having a white pill is really important. The ability to create white pills is really important. If you haven't figured it out yet, what I'm kind of getting at is that there's a certain technique through cheerfulness, through having the ability to believe and transcend in hope, to strengthen your critical thinking and your knowledge in your mind so that when you get into situations, you know how to deal with it, which is preparedness, and to having faith in the transcendent concept that something good can happen if only you muster your resources to deal with it. Then you can actually turn a seemingly black pill into a white pill. This is this idea of transmutation, kind of like alchemical transmutation. As we discussed in season 2 of Into the Storm, what is the true philosopher's stone? Well, it's critical thinking. It's an active, philosophic mind, the ability to take one meaning that seems really bleak and dark and negative and turn it into a positive one. So let's talk about the creator for a moment. If you understand the substance of reality, that we actually live in a spiritual reality, and you explore and enhance your knowledge of what that means, then the more you do that, I call it spiritualization. I also call it self-mastery. In religious circles, they refer to it as grace often, that through life experience, if you reach out for the creator and allow yourself to open your mind to what the God has to offer, then he will impart grace upon you. He will literally increase the spiritual complement of your soul so that you can see the spiritual world all around you and see the opportunities around you. So let's just lay that out real quick. I've mentioned before throughout the series what God is. God, to put it very simply, because we could be talking about that for a long time, but to put it very simply, God created the universe. God is good. God is love. God has a purpose and a plan, and everything in your life is a part of that purpose and plan. What that means is that no matter what is happening in your life, all of it has to do with God's plan. Now, when I say God's plan, I don't mean that there's this plan over here, this one line of fate, and everything else that isn't here is sin and evil and horror, and you're just screwed. And oh boy, you made that mistake when you were 6 years old, and now you're screwed for the rest of your life. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, and this is something that your Urantia book talks about, destiny and fate is what we make of it. And what I mean by that, the destination that God lays before us, that the Creator lays before us, is so all-encompassing. No matter where you think you're going, you're always, in some respect, actually headed in that direction. It doesn't matter where you're going. It means in some respect, you always have the ability to, with your consciousness, with your mind, see that it's actually an opportunity to get closer to the Creator, to get closer to the divine. And if you really believe that, because you thought about it critically, so when I say belief, I don't want you to just be blindly believing. The more you're able to take this idea that no matter what is happening in your life, it's all working to help you be a better, more positive, happy person, that it's going to help you in some way approach God, that no matter what's happening, it's some kind of spiritual lesson and a way to impart grace, as they say in various religions, then it's going to actually help you do that in these life situations. And so that requires what? That requires thinking. A child doesn't necessarily know, so you just have to give it reassurance. But the child over time can learn and use their mind and consciousness and knowledge and truth seeking to take this hazy idea that, everything's going to turn out good if you just apply yourself when you believe in yourself, and actually turn it into real skills. So it's not the Creator just wants us to sit and pray and we just sit there and do nothing. No, I'm sure you've heard the story before. There's a guy trapped on a desert island. He says, God's going to save me. I just got to believe in God and pray to God, and God's going to save me. And so a boat comes by, and he could signal the boat to leave, but instead he does nothing. He's like, God's going to save me. A plane flies by, and instead of signaling the plane, he says, nope, God's going to save me. And then he finds on the beach, somehow there's a cell phone right there. And he says, oh, I don't need this. God's going to save me. I'm kind of being a little fast and loose with the story here. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but I'm going to get the point across. And so what happens? The guy dies and he goes to heaven and he's like, God, what happened? I thought you were going to save me. And God's like, yeah, I sent you a boat. I sent you a plane, and I put a cell phone on the beach, and you didn't use any of them. So it's not that we're going to have blind faith and not use our tools that God gave us. We want to use the tools God gave us. And this brings me back to the beginning. You want to use your imagination. You want to use your mind to think critically. You want to use the time and space you have to carefully assess the potential hazards and perils in your life and find a way to deal with them practically so that when you have to deal with them, what you need and value can be protected and you won't be losing it. So if you think about that, to put it all in context, the universe was designed for a purpose. Every single thing in life is here to teach you something about spiritual growth. And if you look at everything in your life as an opportunity instead of just an obstacle, instead of a problem that you can't face and deal with, instead of this chronic disappointment that you're not going to be able to have the thing that you want, then you will give yourself the inspiration, the freedom of mind and thought, the motivation of self-belief to deal with anything that you can imagine, including your own death, including losing everything, your loved ones, your house, your job, your precious cell phone, whatever it is that you think is so important to you right now. If you allow yourself to really believe in the grand concept of existence, that the good eternal God has a plan in store for you, and that there's many paths up the mountain, that no matter what happens, you can deal with that situation in a positive way and you will gain spiritual growth as a result, then your ability to be happy, cheerful, upbeat, no matter what is happening, it's going to be great. And you'll actually have more consciousness and thinking available to you to really deal with life situations. So it's not that God wants to put us in these crazy situations where we just got to let it all go and we're just got to be okay with the fact that we're going to die of starvation or we're going to lose all our friends and loved ones or anything like that. No. What often is the case, and there's a beautiful tapestry of stories to go with this, is that when you believe in the concept of God and the concept of this transcendent, and you value soul growth and spiritual growth, that every experience you have is going to make you a better person, improve your skills, kind of give you a superpower, then you will deal with the situations at hand. It's like weaving a tapestry. All of these things in your life are part of this tapestry. And if you believe in the transcendent, if you believe in hope, if you believe in soul growth, if you have hope that everything will work out, then the things that are in your path at the moment cease to be these obstacles that you have to avoid and are like nasty and disgusting and, oh, I don't want to deal with this. Why is this happening? No, instead, they're like fun tools. They're actually kind of spiritual toys that you can use to play and inspire yourself to do almost anything you can imagine, no matter what's happening. How important are goals and what you want and dream for with respect to hope in dealing with chaotic situations? Well, there's a big difference between the woman who believes in the concept of the transcendent and that no matter what happens in her life, she will have access to the tools that she needs to grow spiritually, even if she doesn't really understand it at the moment, and the person who only feels happy when they're on Snapchat or Instagram or talking with their friends on a Friday night. If your goals and your values and what you like is so limited and tiny, well, that means that everything that you experience that isn't that is actually an obstacle for you having what you say is exciting to you. Now, you might say, well, Justin, I don't have a choice to determine whether I like or not like something. Well, you actually do. It's a muscle that often goes unused in our modern world because we're in this consumeristic society where everything you can imagine is at the flip of an Amazon buy button. But really, your ability to use your imagination, to think and explore different ideas, and to consider what it might be like, to be open to and use your imagination to think about different possibilities of what you might not like and like. It gives you an incredible superpower. I was a kid, just to give you a personal anecdote, that really liked video games. Mind you, I grew up in the 90s, so there wasn't a whole lot to choose from. And I didn't have a Sega Genesis or anything. I had a Mac, so I had like almost no games. But I had some games. And man, I loved playing this game Marathon. It was a precursor to Halo. It was a Bungie game. And it was like a first-person shooter game. You're like this Marine and you're running around killing aliens. And I loved that game. But when I wasn't playing the game, I was not happy. I was bored all the time. And I didn't like to read. And so what tends to happen especially in our modern world, is we don't allow ourselves to try new things. You don't put the cell phone away for 5 minutes because you got to see what's the next thing that could pop up on Facebook. And so the prospect of you being in your car without your cell phone, without having anything to do, is like this, oh my God, what am I going to do with myself? Your tastes, your preferences are largely dependent on what you allow yourself to explore. And I can tell you, some of the best things that life has to offer, the spiritual things that life has to offer, don't give you quick, easy rewards right away. Music is a great example. If you want to enjoy the pleasure of playing music, or play piano, sing a song, play guitar, it's going to take time. You're going to have to invest a lot of time into doing that. It could take you years. But if you have a goal, let's say you want to sing one of your favorite pop songs, for example, and you're like, you know what? I'm going to buy guitar. I'm going to learn how to play guitar, and I'm going to sing that, I don't know, that Coldplay song, that U2 song, whatever it is. It's going to take time to do it. But over time, if you really value the goal and you try it, initially, it might be frustrating because you don't get the results you want. But if you let go and you allow yourself to believe that if you just keep going through the process, then the goal that you have to learn this song, the plan for that goal will continue to become clearer and more manifest. Then eventually you'll actually have a good practice routine, especially if you go and research and truth seek to gain knowledge about what are the good ways to do this. You'll actually have a good way to achieve your goal, and before you know it, you'll be able to play the song that you want. It might take a few years, but you'll be able to do it. Now you have this whole thing that you love doing that gives you so much reward and meaning in your life. So you have to be able to try new things, and you have to have what's called delayed gratification, that you're willing to entertain the possibility that something could be good and try it enough and be open and keep yourself open enough so that something good can actually manifest. And the grandest concept of that is the pursuit of the Creator, pursuit of God. I mean, what is God? Do you know? It's taken philosophers thousands of years to even potentially answer the question. And a lot of people, in my estimation, don't got it right. A lot of the reasons why people have a hard time dealing with chaotic situations is that they're very closed-minded, and their tastes and their pleasures and their things that their tastes and their pleasures are so tiny and small that if that isn't there, then they're in a hopeless situation now. At a very deep psychological level, your animal body, your inner child, needs to have pleasure, it needs to have happiness, it needs to believe that that's possible. If you're able to expand your horizons and try new things, then you'll know whether you like those things or not. And that will give you a sense of what your values are. So remember, before we talked about the idea that when you try something new, you're having this relationship with this new thing, and you're like, well, if I like it, then you value it, which means you can pour more energy into it, which means it'll generate positive emotion as time goes on. It's investing yourself in this thing. People who don't have expanded horizons, who are very stuck in their current ways of doing things, are going to be hurt the most when a chaotic situation comes about. And when I say hurt, I mean emotionally, psychologically. They're going to be thrown into a much greater state of chaos. Did you always know that what you like now is what you like? No, you have to try it at some point, right? And so, is the tool or the technique of trying new things a good way to discover new things that you like? Yes, it is. If you were patient and invested yourself in these things long enough, would you also say that it helped you expand your horizons and actually made the things that you initially liked even better? Well, often that's the case. again, playing an instrument's a really good example. Or reading a book. There's sometimes you're reading a book and you're like, man, I don't really like this, but let me just keep going. And then it was halfway through the book that it started to get interesting. And man, now it's like everything and you're just consumed by it. Or a good story is another example of this. So if trying new things help you discover new things that you value, and investing yourself with time and patience eventually helps you better understand what you value and it expands your horizons, then would it not be possible to take that engine and apply it to as many different things in your life as possible, to lay claim to the ultimate source of joy and happiness? What I'm getting at is the idea of exploring the Creator. That if we take the time to understand what the reason and purpose of life is, if we take the time to define God properly, and that's really important, then we can see that if God is truly love, if God is good, and in everything and God has a plan, then it means everything in life, as I was mentioning earlier, is part of that plan to help you get closer to God and realize the joy of being spiritually mastered. If you can just believe in those ideas enough to entertain them and expand your knowledge about what that means, then you will lay claim to the single greatest power that hope has to offer. You will lay claim to the transcendent goal of seeking for, knowing, and striving to be like God. Now, what's really important is you have to lay claim to what I would argue is a true and correct definition of what God is and what the purpose of existence is. I've done my best for you throughout this series to lay out a decent overview of what that looks like. And in the future, I'm going to take some time to hopefully really expand and really have a lot more discussion about what that looks like. Because as far as I can tell, the thing that people are missing in their lives more than anything else is meaning and purpose. If you knew that everything in your life was something that you could do to approach the Creator, and that would feel really good, it would be an awesome and amazing adventure, and that it would help make you a stronger, fitter, happier, and more productive person, then is that something that you think you could invest your time in? Do you think that you might spend a little less time on social media, a little less time watching movies or playing video games, a little less time at whatever activity you think you're doing that's going to give you so much value? That whatever activity it is that is inspiring for you, to be sure, I'm not saying I'm trying to take all your tools away, but do you think you'd spend a little time doing that? This is probably one of the best things that we can do. Value spiritual growth, then you'll value seeking for truth. You'll value expanding your knowledge and using that knowledge to develop wisdom. And then you'll also see that really everything that life has to offer is a part of that process. This is something that's shared in a lot of spiritual works, which is that any negative experience you can imagine is often the absence of knowledge and wisdom to deal with it in a way that's actually positive. So when chaos comes in, when uncertainty comes in, then it's actually an opportunity for you to, through making contact with that, realize there's something not present in you that could be present if you invested your imagination to research and gain knowledge and use your time and space to do that, to expand who you are as a being. To close out the episode, let's put this into context. Crazy, uncertain situations happen all the time. If you don't have a plan to deal with them, if you don't have a way to protect your needs and values, then when that happens, it's going to create massive obstacles that you feel like you can't overcome. And it's going to create a lot of negative emotion that makes you almost useless and causes a lot of pain and suffering. But if you can use the time you have available now to prepare, to use critical thinking, to expand your knowledge, to believe in the idea that no matter what happens, you have the powers to deal with it because you're a capable person, then there's almost any situation you can imagine to help you with that. The last thing I was just talking about is the needs and values part. If you're somebody that the only thing you value is playing your Game Boy, and the power goes out and you're in a blackout situation, and all of a sudden you have no access to power, what's going to happen? In the satchel, the spiritual satchel of the things that you can do that make you feel inspired, there's nothing there. But if you're somebody who expands your dreams and your values because you've discovered new ones and you've explored the biggest and most important and transcendently powerful value that there possibly is, which is to seek for, know, and strive to be like God, the Creator, then literally everything that exists in the universe, everything that is physically present, that everything that is physical, mental, emotional, everything in the future, in the past, in the present, everything in existence itself, all the ideas, all the physical objects, all of that is actually a tool, an opportunity, a part of your ability to get what you need and value. And that, my friends, is probably one of the biggest secrets to hope that there is. That when you really take the time to explore what the divine is, to explore the Creator, to define the Creator, to understand that life itself is an opportunity to know the Creator and to become like the Creator, and that's what the purpose of life is, then every experience is an opportunity to gain more insight into that. And so when things get crazy, when chaos happens, you don't have access to your Game Boy, you don't have access to the thing that you love, then you're like, oh, well, there's probably, through the transcendent hope concept, there's probably something awesome in store. If I just keep an open mind and I use my wits and I use my intelligence, my sagacity as it's called, then I can unlock and discover this treasure that I didn't even know was here. And it's every moment of life kind of becomes a delightful surprise. And that's kind of what like being a kid is like, because when you're a kid, things are so new that as long as you're in a, in your happy, positive household, then a kid is just filled with joy all the time. The new things don't scare the child. New things are an opportunity to explore, to have an adventure. And it's that adventurous spirit that cheerfulness brings when you have a good understanding of the divine and the meaning of life and how to use your being as the tools you have available to you to deal with any situation. I believe that situations are about to unfold in this world that are potentially going to change everything. I don't know what's going to happen. We could be going down a road that causes a lot of darkness. But even in that dark place, but even in a situation where maybe there might be like a cabal takeover of the world, the spirit of consciousness itself doesn't die. It is itself part of this adventure that we as beings of consciousness have the ability to do something with. As spiritual works say, like the Urantia book, it's often during these chaotic, seemingly negative situations that we reflect on and empower ourselves and give ourselves a great opportunity to develop and grow spiritually. Growth through adversity has been called. A shock test is another example. How do you build muscle? Well, you build muscle because you have to push yourself to your limits. And then that literally causes new muscle tissue to grow and become stronger. Now, on a more positive end, and this is kind of where I'm leaning, in my estimation, there's a lot of indications that there's going to be an event happens in the future here that is going to cause a lot of change and chaos to get thrust in the world. But out of that chaos is going to be the necessary change to remove all these situations and problems that have been plaguing our world for a really long time, especially in the modern age. In the interim, there might be a situation where we lose power, where there's civil unrest, where you might not have access to food or things like this. And so I would encourage you, I've been putting this information on my website, Stillness in the Storm. I'm putting it out on my social media. I would encourage you to get some supplies. Find a way to get your basic needs met. Think about and prepare for potential somewhat chaotic situations. If you're watching this video and you don't necessarily have a lot of resources and time, then make some connections to people. Go to a church if you can. That's a good one. Go to a spiritual group. Find a way to make human connections with other people, because often it's our human connections and the trust that we build with other people that'll help us come together during these chaotic situations and weather storms. And if you can prepare, get yourself some extra food, dry food that you can prepare without electricity, without heat. Get yourself some water and water cleansing devices, and have a way to potentially, if you need to, go to a place where you can find shelter and safety. Now, I want to reassure all of you that in my personal opinion, what is about to happen is likely going to be positive. I'm not somebody who has blind hope. I'm a strategic thinker. I use multivariate logic to consider all sorts of different possibilities, assess a probability associated with that, and then as new data emerges, then it's kind of like a wheel, like, oh, well, this seems more likely now, and oh, well, this seems more likely now, and this seems more likely. And I'm constantly analyzing and assessing information. So I would say, to put it very simply, that what is going to unfold is likely going to be positive for humanity, positive for all of us. In the beginning, it might look a little chaotic, but I think ultimately it's going to be very good. And it's going to ask us to really use these tools for hope that I've been trying to talk to you about. And if we can do this, if you can take the time to really think about it, hopefully I've done a good job at expressing the substance of what hope has to offer and how to actually create realistic, practical, substantive hope that makes us stronger, fitter people, because we're using our minds, we're using positive emotions by thinking about positive outcomes and transcendent outcomes, and having faith that good things will happen no matter what happens, because we live in a good, positive universe. Then no matter what happens will likely lead you to a positive end. So I hope that this episode about hope has given you hope, and hopefully given you the opportunity to realize that you've got a lot more power in your hands to create a hopeful, positive future. Much love, and be well. You're a lot stronger than you think.
The greatest secrets of relationships are about to be revealed. The key to leading a happy life, healing the wounds of the past, and raising brilliant, healthy children can be unlocked with a truly vital relationship. We need not fear, for anything can be reborn in the light of truth. All this, and more in the next episode of Into the Storm.